Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is Technique Tuesday. Tuck stitch is a technique that creates folds on the surface of the fabric. You can see it really well in this particular hat. When we zoom in on the sock cuff, we can see that tucks were created for the entire round multiple times to create these ridges. But if it's used when you are finishing your work, that fold can become a hem. So I have two swatches here. One was knit flat, one was worked in the round, and for both of those I want to finish the knitting by creating a hem, and I am going to do that without having to bind off the stitches first and then sewing them to the back of the work. Instead, I will be joining the live stitches to a row of the purl bumps on the back, and as I join those live stitches to a stitch in the fabric, I will be doing the bind off at the same time. The first step is to determine how deep you want your hem to be. In my case, I want something that's about 10 rows deep. In other words, I want there to be about 10 rows below where these live stitches are to here, which means I actually need 20 rows. I need to join these live stitches together with a row of purl bumps that are 20 rows below the needle. Rather than capturing them one at a time and then knitting them together with a live stitch, I'd like to capture all of them at the same time so that they're all on a spare needle at one time. For something short like this, I can use a double pointed needle, and I'm using one that's quite a bit smaller than the needle I was working with. Alternatively, you can use a circular needle. And in the case of doing something like a sweater in the round, you definitely are going to need something with more length. So I find it a little tricky to pick up a stitch at the edge just as a starting stitch, and so my preference is to start further away. I happen to have 21 stitches on the needle, so I'm going to start 10 stitches in. So 2, 4, 6, 8. So this is stitch number 10 right here, and I'm going to count 20 bumps below this. So this is bump number 1, and I'm going to count below. So what I want to do is count the bumps that are directly below this stitch. So when you're looking at purl bumps on the back, you'll see that this purl bump right here is the head of the stitch that's below the live stitch. And then there are these offset little bumps right here. Those are the running threads that connect one stitch to another. So this bump right here is connecting that stitch to that stitch. So when we're counting down, we want to count these upper bumps because these come in pairs. You can see there's an upper bump and these lower bumps. So the upper bumps are the heads of the stitches. I want to count up to 20 down from that live stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So here is 20 right here. What I'm going to do is capture all of these upper bumps all the way to the edge. So I'm going to take this out right now. I'm going to come in from above. So I'm going to come in above this bump, and I'm just going to capture each of these going across. And then as I get to the edge, you can see that there is that kind of bump that you get at the edge. And I'm going to go through that one right there. So let's just confirm that I have 10 stitches on the needle. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. All right, so I have 10. Well, I can continue in the other direction. I'm right-handed, so I like to work in this direction. Now, when I've turned it upside down, that upper bump is now the lower bump because we've turned everything upside down. I'm still going to come in from above like that. This time through the lower bumps because I've turned the work upside down. So when you're working in the round, you don't have an edge, so you don't have a tricky bump to try to capture, except that you have to distinguish it between a stitch that's at the end of the round. And so what I would do is count down 20 bumps from that first stitch and mark it with a marker. And when you're working in the round, you just usually have so many more stitches. You might want to mark this off in sections. You could do a half a round at a time or a quarter of a round at a time. I think I have 100 stitches on the needle, so I could do, say, 25 at a time, and put a marker on the table and then count down the 25 rows and place a marker in the stitch that's 20 below, just like I have here, so that as you're working in sections, you can start from one marker and then work toward the stitches that have already been captured. So once you have captured all of the stitches for the row or the section that you're working with, you're going to bring that needle up in parallel with the needle that has the live stitches. And then you're going to join these by working a stitch from the front needle together with a stitch from the back needle. But first, I want you to notice the angle that these stitches are lying at. The way that I picked up, I was working right to left and I was coming above the bump. These stitches have an angle that's slightly to the left. So if that's what your stitches look like, then you can just work them together. So this is very much like a 3-needle join or 3-needle bind off, where you insert the needle through the first stitch on each of those needles. You wrap your yarn or pick it if you're a continental knitter, and then you pull it through that first needle. You can let that one come off the needle, and then you pull it through the second one and let that off the needle. And again, if these are angled to the left like that and you are working off the left-hand needles like in standard knitting. So now you're going to go through the next 2 stitches and you're going to knit those. So you pull it through the first stitch, let that one off the needle, pull it through the second one, let that off the needle. Now you've got 2 stitches on your right hand needle and you can bind those off as long as you don't split your stitch. There we go. And then you keep working. So you work the next pair of stitches. Bind them off, and so on, all the way across. So I talked about how if you came in from above, it was hanging to the left. But if you instead were capturing from below like this, if that's just easier for you or just you did that automatically so that they're leaning to the right, or if you were, say, left-handed and you were doing what I said, which was to capture from above, that would also, and I'm going to be really bad at capturing it with my left hand, that would also cause it to lean to the right. So let me show you how you handle joining stitches that were captured like this so that they are leaning to the right. What you need to know about these stitches is that when they are leaning to the right, they're hanging on the needle very similarly to a regular stitch. But the leading leg, the leg that's closest to this tip, is hanging over the back. In order to work a stitch so that it is not twisted, you always have to work it so that you're pushing against that leaning leg as you're inserting your needle through the stitch. So if it's hanging over like this, like a standard method, that leading leg is hanging over the right and you would just enter it this way. When it is hanging over the back, you have to enter it in. So it seems like you're going through the back. A lot of people say you're going through the back, but you're going against this leading leg. So if you have these captured stitches sitting on the needle angled to the right with the leaning leg over the back, and your normal stitches, the live stitches that are on the needle, have the leading leg hanging over the front, then the way that you're working them together is, again, through the leading leg. In this case, this on the front needle, it's through the front because the leading leg is over the front. And then On the back needle, you would go, the leading leg is over the back, so you'd have to go this way. And this will create a join that is not twisted. If what you were trying to do in this situation was work through the front, you would be working through the trailing leg. Anytime you work through the trailing leg of a stitch, you end up twisting it. I don't know if you can see in the bottom how that's going to end up twisting the stitch. That's going to tighten them, and it's going to make the fabric less stretchy. So if that's the situation you're in where the stitch is leaning to the right on that back needle, just make sure that you are entering it against that leaning leg. It will still work out, but just be aware of that. Now, if you captured your stitches like this because you're left-handed and you are also a mirror knitter, so these are stitches are in your right hand and you're working off of the right hand needle, you most likely want your stitches to be hanging over the right, leaning to the right like that for mirror knitting. But if you are doing standard knitting off of the left hand needles, just be aware of that different lean. So I have a couple of tips for you. I'm getting to the end of the round, so it's not so hard to hold these needles parallel. But when I was in the middle of the round, these two needles just wanted to keep separating from each other. So what I found useful was to use a locking stitch marker, 4 or 5 inches away, and just put it into both of the needles and lock them together. And that worked really well for me. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was that this technique for hemming is very much, the process is very much like a 3-needle bind off. And you will find that you get kind of this ridge on the inside of the work, and it's only on the inside. It doesn't show on the outside. But you can use a variation of this technique in order to create a flatter chain, which is what I've done right here. So this kind of just lays flat against the surface. And this is what I would call a finessed version of the 3-needle bind off. I've done a complete video on that, which I will link to above and as well as down below, just to give you a quick preview of it. If you hold there's done a little bit differently if you hold the yarn in your left hand versus your right hand. If you hold it in your left hand, you are going to keep it between the 2 needles. So it is behind the first needle and in front of the second needle. You're going to enter the first stitch on the front needle as if to knit, but you're going to enter the first stitch on the back needle as if to purl. So you're going to wrap the yarn for purling, pull it through, and then you're going to come through that front stitch, and then you can let them both off the needle. At that point, you can then do your bind off. So again, that was a quick look at it. If you hold the yarn in your right hand like this, the yarn's going to be behind. You're going to enter as if to knit. Then you're going to bring the yarn forward like you're purling so that you can enter this one as if to purl, and then you will actually purl it. Let that stitch off the needle. Bring the yarn to the back again so that you can pull the yarn through the front. So I will link the video that shows this in detail down in the video description, but it does end up giving you a flatter result than on the inside of the work than the other method does. I ran out of yarn as I had just a few stitches left, so I just attached some more yarn here in order to finish the bind off. Now I've cut the yarn, leaving a tail. I'm just going to enlarge that last stitch and pull it out. But now what I can do is, so that I don't have this kind of gap here, I can join this last chain of the round to the first chain of the round. So I'm just going to go under the 2 legs of that first chain. And then I'm going to go back down through the center of this last chain. And that creates a chain that brings them together. And it kind of hides the fact that there's a little jog that you get when you are working in the round. So it's hard to say whether this looks any different from the outside when you do the finessed flat version. This is the side where I did the regular knit 2 together, and this is the side where I did the finessed version. It might be a little bit flatter from this side. It's really hard to tell. It is certainly nice and stretchy, and that's because I was not working my bind off chains too tightly, so it can be a nice result if you are looking for a stockinette hem. For more bind off techniques, check out this playlist over here. And if you're interested in my Casual Friday podcast, you can find those in this playlist over here. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.